And joining me on the strategic significance of President Putin's visit to India, Ambassador Ajay Malhotra, India's former ambassador to Russia. Jonah is former advisor to President Biden at the National University of Singapore. Sandeep Unnithan is a senior journalist joining me on the show. Ambassador Malhotra, India and Russia share a close strategic partnership, but post-Operation Sindoor and the meeting in Tianjin, will there be more global focus on the visit and the outcome? What do you think would be a key takeaway?
I'm fairly certain there would be a lot of focus on this visit. President Putin doesn't travel out very often, given the war situation with Ukraine. And any visit, and that too to a country of some importance like India, I think will draw the world's attention. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And the outcome of the visit also will have implications and bearing for international relations as a whole and for our relations with several countries.
Jonah, President Trump was to come to India for the Quad Summit. That didn't happen. President Putin is coming. They're meeting in midst of this additional 25% tariff burden on India. How would the US be viewing President Putin's visit to India?
Well, they should be viewing it as the direct outcome of Mr. Trump's rather antagonistic attitude towards India, slapping India with the world's highest tariffs, while at the same time not giving the same level of tariffs to Putin's Russia is just mystifying. And at least as it might look to an observer, Prime Minister Modi is striking back, is trying to say, we're not going to be bound by the U.S. dictates. We're going to further diversify our defense relationships.
Defense relationships, though, oil imports from Russia are going down, energy imports from the US are increasing, Sandeep, but a lot of homework being done on the strategic partnership and defense cooperation. Give us more details. I believe there are conversations on not just the S-400s, but the S-500s, Su-57 fighter jets to be made in India, complete transfer of technology, nuclear submarines on lease. How much of this is just optics? And how will India take this forward in view of a CAATSA sanctions waiver, which was S-400 specific?
Gaurav, I think what we're looking at is a very historic visit with President Putin visiting India for it's the 25th anniversary of the special strategic partnership with the Russian Federation. And extraordinary times, Russia is in the middle of a war, one of its longest wars of the 21st century. India is in the midst of Operation Sindoor, which is an ongoing operation. And Operation Sindoor would not have been the success it had been, Gaurav, but for those two critical systems, the BrahMos supersonic missile, and of course the S-400 long-range air defense missile. Now, what we are being told is that the 5 S-400 regiments are a done deal. This was the original plan as well, Gaurav. Before, it was for 10 regiments of the S-400. It was scaled back to 5. We're getting those 5 again. And in addition to that, there's talks of the S-500, which is the next generation of long-range air defense missiles, which basically can tackle threats at the edge of space, Gaurav. It can take down satellites, it can take down hypersonic missiles, stealth aircraft. This is the kind of technology that India wants. And of course, on the 15th of August, we heard it from the Prime Minister, where he announced that we would have a Sudarshan Chakra shield, a missile defense shield over India very soon. He's given a timeline of 10 years. It is capabilities like the S-500 and the S-400 that India very urgently requires, Gaurav, to secure its airspace. And of course, there are platforms like the Su-57 fifth generation fighter aircraft, only as an interim buy before we can buy, get our own AMCA aircraft.
AMCA in place.
Nuclear-powered attack submarines, Gaurav, it's the only relationship in the world where one country leases nuclear-powered attack submarines from another. We have a Chakra 3 coming in 2 years from now. And there's an offer of 2 more such submarines should India want to option that lease arrangement.
So, Ambassador Malhotra, will procurement of this military hardware depend on the outcome of the Russia-Ukraine war? Because there are some reports that suggest Europe is working on a strategy to keep helping Ukraine despite either US reluctance or US pulling back completely?
Well, in my view, Europe has not got much remaining to offer to help the Ukrainians. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. And I think the Russians have ramped up their production capabilities sufficiently to handle the Ukraine war, actually with one hand tied behind their backs. And I do see them coming forward. We are a partner of long standing, 6.5 decades of military cooperation out there. And they offered us the S-400 a long time ago. In fact, we were the ones who didn't take it. And I'm very happy that a responsible government is now looking to the protection of its civilian population. You can't just go nuclear and then forget about, counter nuclear strikes by somebody else. And we live in a neighborhood where we have two countries who have nuclear weaponry. So yeah, it's good that we're looking at S-400. I think a few S-400 systems, the Russians have it in hand. And if that 5+5, as Sandeep has mentioned, is what's out there, it's absolutely appropriate. And we must look at the S-500 going ahead. I'm sure we would be the first to be offered it by the Russians. But the point here is we have to also see that its capabilities are proven. And I think that sharing of data, as per media reports, is what is going on. And when that's in place, we would look at getting the S-500. Because a responsible government must have these things in place, at least for the average citizen in the country. You can't just leave us exposed by doing nuclear tests and then forgetting about the defensive aspects of what needs to be done.
Absolutely. But Jonah Blank, will CAATSA sanctions come into play? Should India go ahead, whether it's a couple of squadrons of Su-57 as an interim, the Akula class submarines, should we go in for additional S-400 and S-500 systems? Because the waiver was only for the existing 39,000 crore rupee deal that predates CAATSA.
Yes, the sanctions are a real issue. And I think an even bigger issue is India's overall direction in its defense relationships. For around 20 years, India has been trying to move and has been moving from Russia-supplied platforms to Western, US and NATO supplied platforms, because they're better and they're the future. But there have been two main problems. First is that US and other Western allies using US technology have been very reluctant to co-produce and to transfer technology. And the second, which is really just an issue in the past year, is that in the second Trump administration, India has felt quite rightly that the US is a highly unreliable supplier. So I think there is an appetite to go with Western platforms for the future, but the West, and particularly the US, is making that exceptionally difficult.
And not for the first time, Mr. Blank, as you would well recall, when India did the 1998 Pokhran nuclear tests, our entire Sea King and Sea Harrier fleet was grounded because UK and US would not give spares. The light combat aircraft suffered because the G404 engines did not come. And that is why US was always seen as a very unreliable partner. It took 25 years to overcome that, Sandeep. And once again, we are back in exactly the same position that the Americans are extremely unreliable. So there's another generation in India that's growing up realizing how unreliable the Americans are. If the West can be trusted, it's only the French, Sandeep, isn't it?
Absolutely, Gaurav. And if you've seen the moves that the government of India has made over the last couple of weeks and months, it's towards France as being the halfway house between East and West. And this has always been the case, where every time we wanted, cutting edge Western technology, where we went to France, because the French sold us technology without any strings attached. They might be a little expensive, but there is no diplomatic leverage that they have sought over arms transfers. And this is, again, what we are looking at. We are looking at India going back to France for high technology systems like fighter jet engines. Safran is the name that's the rounds. with the light combat aircraft, Gaurav, it was a leap of faith. We trusted the Americans to supply us the GE 404 and later the 414 engines. That trust has been completely shattered in 2025. And as you rightly mentioned, we are back to 1998. Literally, this is sanctions by some other name, Gaurav. This so-called supply chain issues, which is literally sabotaging our prized light combat aircraft indigenous program, is nothing but sanctions by another name. And this is a call that the government of India seems to have made, that we will most likely go with France and certainly with Russia as a preferred security partner, Gaurav.
Because that's tried and tested relationship that's held India in good stead in the past, unlike the Americans. But Ambassador Malhotra, if India were to go in for the additional S-400s and the S-500s and the Russia-Ukraine war is still on, does India risk additional sanctions from the West?
Well, these are unilateral sanctions. If the Americans put them, we'll have to live with it. This is really not the behavior we expect of a partner to whom we want good relations with. We not only look to partnering with the Americans, but with the Russians. So both of them are our friends. And if you see Trump reaching out to Putin, the meetings that are taking place, exchanges that are taking place, USA and Russia may well move ahead and sort this issue out. And we can't then be left stranded up here. And in any case, we have to look to our own domestic manufacturing. And I agree with Sandeep, what he said. The Safran engine TOT deal that lies ahead is very encouraging. Because it's not that we want Russian or even French or American. We want to have our own manufacturing for everything. And that's why Atmanirbhar, etc., has to be done. Because ultimately, you can't be a country which claims to have strategic autonomy when 70-80% of your requirements of arms and weaponry are imported. It doesn't matter from where. So we need to move in this direction, and yet we can work with the Americans. Their procedures are such that congressional approval takes time, etc., and spares are a problem. Technology transfer doesn't take place, so we have to live with that.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean we are unfriendly towards them. We are friendly towards them and want to have good relations with them.
Absolutely. And what Trump did, Jonah Blank, was completely uncalled for. The additional 25% sanctions, the delay in GE-404 engines. It would just appear that America is not really reliable as a partner. But are we to believe that in case the Russia-Ukraine war continues and India were to go in for additional military hardware from Russia, there would be more sanctions that would strain India-US relations even further? Anyways, America is getting closer to Pakistan, which is a cause for grave concern for India.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Will there be additional sanctions? We don't know, because one of the hallmarks of the Trump administration is utter unpredictability. There really is not a coherent geostrategic plan here. How can one find the logic of slapping the world's highest tariffs on India purportedly for purchasing Russian oil at the same time that Mr. Trump is taking Russia's side in its war against Ukraine? It's just very difficult to see the logic there, setting aside the fact that China buys more Russian oil than India does, and it is not hit with this extra 25% tariff.
Oh, absolutely. So, Sandeep, all eyes also on this meeting. We're told Steve Witkoff is carrying a message from the US president for President Putin. The outcome of that, will that have an impact on whatever India and Russia intend to do, or India and Russia will bash on regardless?
I think, Gaurav, what we have with the Russians is such a unique relationship that it's not going to be, held hostage by other relationships that India has, very critical ones like the India-US relationships. And I think that regardless of what happens, the India-Russia relationship is going to proceed. Trump would, of course, want India to, buy a lot of American oil and, of course, American weapons, but that doesn't seem to be happening given the kind of trust deficit that now exists, Gaurav. But for the moment, I think New Delhi Prime Minister Modi is very clear that Russia represents the way ahead when it comes to solving India's strategic dilemmas, whether it is energy or its national security, Gaurav.
Is that also your appreciation, the last 30 seconds that I have on this part of the show, Ambassador Malhotra, that India will go ahead, whatever we want to buy from Russia, irrespective of how the Russia-Ukraine war pans out in future?
Yes, we should. I mean, we are not subject to things that happen elsewhere. These are our decisions. We have to act in our national interest. And that if it demands that we do something to protect our citizens by having these particular systems, we should have them. Ultimately, our own manufactured systems, but till then, if it means Russian systems, so be it. And if the Americans had a competing system, we'd be happy to hear about it. But they don't have anything that can compare with the S-500. So, well,
Yep,
so
the third clearly nowhere close, but I will let that be the last word on this part of the show. Jonah Blank, Ambassador Malhotra and Sandeep, as always, for joining me here on India First. Many thanks. We'll be tracking President Putin's visit very closely.